Okay, so we'll continue with identifying usual results using the range rule of thumb in the case of binomial random variable. So according to our range rule of thumb, most values are within 2 standard deviations of the mean. So that means if you take the mean and add 2 times the standard deviation, that's a maximum, or the mean minus 2 standard deviation, that's a minimum usual value. So you've seen something like this before, back when we had the empirical rule. We haven't shown in this class, but we still may because the course isn't over yet, that the binomial distribution under certain circumstances does give rise to a bell-shaped curve. And in the bell-shaped curve, the center of that curve is the mean. And, within 2 standard deviations, you expect to find about 95% of the values. If these are, say, values of x, the random variable, and then the y-axis here would be frequency. So about 95% of your data would be within 2 standard deviations of the mean. So that's what I'm, coloring in here. So this would be the mean minus 2 sigma, and this would be the mean plus 2 sigma. So that's about 95% of the distribution. So that's why we say usual, most values would be within that range. So in this particular example, we have 23 multiple choice questions where each question has 5 possible values, and we want to use the range rule of thumb to determine usual values. So in order to determine the usual values, we have to first start with finding the mean and standard deviation. So what's the mean here? So the mean, we just saw in the previous slide, that's up here. The mean is n times p, and the variance is n times p times 1 minus p. Standard deviation is the square root of that. So the mean is n times p, and we know what n is because there's 23 questions, so n is 23. And what's p? Well, p is going to be the probability of getting an answer correct. And what's the probability of getting an answer correct? Well, hopefully you said there's one way to get a correct answer and 5 possible choices. So it's going to be 1 in 5 or 0.2, 2/10. So the mean then is going to be 23 times 0.2, which is 4.6. And the standard deviation, well, we'll start with the variance. The variance is n times p times 1 minus p. N is 23. P is 0.2. And 1 minus p then is 0.98. So the variance then is 23 times 0.2 times 0.98, which is 4.508. So that tells us that the standard deviation is the square root of this value, 4.508. And that's, if we take the second, second x squared, which gives you square root, and we can put answer in there, or you could just type in 4.508. You get approximately 2.123. It's got a ring to it. So we'll use that. So what are the usual values? So usual values would be within the mean plus or minus 2 times sigma. So that's going to be the same as 4.6 plus or minus 2 times 2.123. Whoops. Let me go back. 2.123. So what are those values? Well, the minimum usual is going to be, no, it's kind of messy. Let me enlarge that. The minimum usual will be, let's clear this, it will be 4.6 minus 2 times 2.123, which is equal to actually 0.354, and the maximum usual will be equal to, will be equal to the mean plus 2 times the standard deviation. So instead of minus, here we have plus, and that would be 8.846. Okay, so actually, I mean, in terms of answering this question, it would be usual to get how many or more questions correct by guessing alone. Well, between, let's see, 0 and 9, like the lower bound here would be 0 and the upper bound here would be 9. So that's the usual range. Usual range is within these values here.